For decades, saturated fat has been widely labeled a dietary villain, associated with clogged arteries, heart disease, and early death. This view is largely based on early epidemiological studies from the mid-20th century, which found a correlation between saturated fat intake and elevated cholesterol levels, particularly LDL, bad cholesterol. As a result, saturated fat was broadly vilified and low-fat, high-carbohydrate diets were aggressively promoted in public health campaigns. But in recent years, emerging research has complicated this narrative, suggesting that saturated fat may not be as uniformly harmful as once believed, at least not in every context. Saturated fats are found in animal products like butter, cheese, red meat, and lard, as well as in some plant-based foods like coconut oil and palm oil. They do raise LDL cholesterol, but they also increase HDL, good cholesterol, which helps remove LDL from the bloodstream. Moreover, not all LDL is the same. Saturated fats tend to raise larger, less dense LDL particles, which are thought to be less atherogenic than small, dense LDL particles that are more strongly associated with heart disease risk. This nuanced understanding of cholesterol subtypes calls into question the blanket condemnation of saturated fats based solely on their impact on total LDL. Large meta-analyses over the last decade have found no clear evidence that saturated fat intake is directly associated with increased heart disease risk in the general population. Some even suggest that the risk depends on what replaces saturated fat in the diet. For instance, when saturated fat is replaced with refined carbohydrates, a common outcome in low-fat diets, cardiovascular risk may actually rise due to increases in insulin resistance, triglycerides, and inflammation. Conversely, when saturated fat is replaced with polyunsaturated fats from nuts, seeds, and fish, cardiovascular outcomes do improve. This means saturated fat isn't inherently dangerous. Its health impact hinges on overall dietary context. There's also growing interest in the potential role of saturated fat in brain health. The brain is composed largely of fat and cholesterol, and adequate fat intake is essential for maintaining neural membranes, myelin sheaths, and hormone balance. Some researchers have proposed that certain saturated fats, particularly those from dairy and whole foods, might support cognitive function, especially in older adults. Observational studies on full-fat dairy consumption have shown mixed but occasionally favorable associations with memory and mental clarity, although causation hasn't been established. Still, caution is warranted. While not all saturated fats are equal, excessive intake, especially from highly processed or industrial sources, can promote chronic inflammation, endothelial dysfunction, and metabolic strain, particularly in individuals with existing risk factors like diabetes, obesity, or high blood pressure. The combination of high saturated fat and low dietary fiber or high sugar intake appears to amplify cardiovascular and cognitive risk. Additionally, overconsumption of red and processed meats, which are high in both saturated fats and sodium, has been more consistently linked with negative health outcomes than consumption of saturated fats from dairy or coconut. Another important factor is food quality. Saturated fat from minimally processed, nutrient-dense sources like eggs, cheese, or pasteurized meats may behave differently in the body than saturated fat from ultra-processed frozen meals or fast food. In whole foods, saturated fats come packaged with vitamins, minerals, and other bioactive compounds that can modify their metabolic effects. This reinforces the idea that food matrix and dietary pattern, not isolated nutrients, are what ultimately determine health outcomes. In light of these findings, many experts now recommend a shift away from nutrient-based thinking, saturated fat is bad, toward food-based guidance, favor minimally processed, nutrient-rich foods. Rather than aiming to eliminate saturated fat altogether, a more balanced approach involves limiting intake from processed foods and emphasizing unsaturated fats from nuts, seeds, avocados, olive oil, and fatty fish, while still including some whole food sources of saturated fat in moderation. In conclusion, saturated fat is not a universal villain, but neither is it entirely innocent. It has been oversimplified in past public health messaging, and newer data supports a more individualized, context-sensitive view. For most people, moderate intake of saturated fat from whole foods, within the framework of a diet rich in fiber, antioxidants, and unsaturated fats, is unlikely to be harmful and may even be compatible with good cardiovascular and brain health. The real danger lies in excess, imbalance, and poor quality diets, not in saturated fat alone.